Okay, a very good evening to all of you. Thanks very much for joining in this evening. Let me start with just briefly introducing myself. You all would have seen me over the last couple of days or so. And I basically at present, look after the Astronomy Center of Educators at IUCA, along with my colleagues, Dr. Prakash Arumagasamy, who is now disguised as Astronomy Center for Educators over here, and Jamir Manur, and Aniket Kadu, who is our video editor, who is not present right now. And I had worked at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research for about 40 years. And after superannuation, I joined IUCA to set up the center and run it for the last 6 years. Dr. Avinash Deshpande from RRI is also a visiting faculty who interacts closely with us. And while I was at TIFR, I was also on deputation for 5 years as the Vice Chancellor of Cotton University, the first Vice Chancellor when the college converted to university. So I'll draw upon some of those experiences as well in today's deliberations. But what I would like you to do is I would like you to be interactive, and you're free to interrupt at any point, and you're also welcome to share your experiences in terms of academic leadership, governance, and management in your institution. I'm sure all of us have had experiences which are both good and bad, but you're welcome to share things which may be of broader interest or relevance in terms of academic leadership and governance and management of institutions. But before we go into that, let me just look at briefly that if you were to say what are the objectives or work of a university or institution of higher education, then broadly, very broadly, you can look at finer divisions as well. Teaching across disciplines, and by teaching I would mean not just physics, maths, history, science, but also skill development, broad ground teaching across disciplines. Then you also have this major component in the university where you evaluate students of how much they have learned, how well they have learned, and the examination cell is a huge sort of apparatus in any university, particularly in affiliating universities. It can be extremely large when there are several hundred colleges which may be affiliated to a university. But another prime activity of a university is also generation of new knowledge, because generation of new knowledge also leads to the creation of or invention of new tools which help us in many different ways. Not only help us in terms of our mobility, social mobility, economic mobility, but also takes our creativity and understanding forward. Now, these objectives, as you can see, are somewhat different from those of a corporate sector. So in the corporate sector, what do? You try to manufacture and market goods, or you just trade in goods. You buy from one, sell in another, or make some changes, or assemble and sell. But basically, your motivation is to try and take strategic decisions for making profit and pass on profit to the shareholders of the company or the corporate sector. Besides, of course, the huge disparities in salaries with the executives being paid huge amounts, that's true of almost every country where this is in place. But today what is happening is that not only in India but elsewhere as well, these boundaries are getting blurred. Traditionally, universities were seen as institutions for public good. It was seen as something which was the responsibility of the state, and state invested quite heavily on it. Even if it was 6% in India for a very long time, at least the thinking was that the state should play a major role till recent times. Today actually driven by a neoliberal economy, driven by market forces, that education is seen more as a personal good. You pay for it, you get educated, you move forward. It is seen less and less of a state responsibility. It may not be said so explicitly as I've said it, but you can see for yourself that today the NEP, for example, talks about increasing the gross enrollment ratio from about 27.3% today to about 50% by 2035 or so. And you can see the allocation that has been made over the years in terms of promoting education. I mean, it's still 6% of the GDP, and you know how much 6% of the GDP, what we have achieved. So with very minimal funding, the increasing role will be played by the private sector. And that we can see already in the colleges. A majority of colleges are in the private sector, although the majority of the institutions, higher education institutions, the university level, are still in the public sector. And if you look at the performance of these two categories of institutions, at least today, that most of the generation of knowledge, if you take the leading papers, if you take the leading innovations, that you will find them coming from the public sector, not from the private sector. But even in the ranking of universities, if you see, or institutions, you'll find that the public institutions are occupying much higher ranks on average than the private institutions. And as I said, boundaries are becoming blurred, and it is being increasingly marketized, with the private sector playing an increasingly important role. So this is the kind of background that that one has to keep in mind while looking at governance structures and the academic leadership that one is looking forward to. Now, there are various forms of university governance. Over the years, and Professor Ian McNee was Professor Emeritus for Higher Education and Management at the School of Education at the University of Greenwich. He sort of summarized this many years ago, and we'll go through each one of them. But one should also realize the outset that governance structures are also responding to internal processes and also external factors. The university per se is also a very contested space, and you have various interest forces within, but the governance structures would also have to do deal with external factors, the state, the industry, the corporate sector, the accreditation and evaluation agencies. So there are a whole host of aspects which governance structures have to deal with. Now, what are the different forms of governance structures that one normally talks about? I'm just borrowing from the summary by Professor Ian McNee many years ago. These broadly fall into the categories of collegium forms of governance, bureaucracy, corporation kind of management, and enterprise kind of management. And the kinds of governance structures we have are also important to understand of how policy structures which are made translates to changes in the grassroots level. Okay, and that is very important because you would find that when a university functions with a degree of transparency and decisions are being taken and why they're taken and how they're taken, the faculty or the community would be far more enthused about it than saying this has to be done. And that is an important aspect which one needs to bear in mind as we go along to different kinds of, as we discuss different kinds of management. Okay. Now let's look at the collegial or collegial form of governance. What is meant by collegium or collegial form of governance? Okay. Here, the formal decision making is by the academic community or a significant fraction of it. Okay. So this is basically the academic community. Okay. And where do you see it today still in India in many places? In the IITs, for example, you have the Senate. In the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, where I have had worked for many years, you have the Academic Council, which is largely consists of the faculty. You also have it, you also have the faculty taking an important role. For example, in the National Center for Radio Astrophysics, where I was there, and the Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics, where I am currently there. Example of Academic Council, I put down Tejpur University. I put down these institutions not because they are limited to these, but because I've had a direct experience of dealing with these institutions and being part of either the bodies themselves or being closely familiar with the way that things get done. So in the IITs, for example, the Senate consists of all faculty members above at professor level and above. Okay, that is true of the Academic Council of Tejpur University. In TIFR, actually, what they have done is initially it was professors where faculty meetings were held, but now all faculty members at whatever level they may be are part of the faculty body, which makes decisions. And decisions in that sense are recommendations, okay? But the director or the head of the center are also members of this group or body of persons, and it is extremely rare and highly unlikely that the director or the head of the institution will go against what has been collectively decided in a faculty meeting, in a collegium or collegial form of governance. So in terms of appointments, in terms of executive powers, the director may have the executive power, but the decision-making process is done by a collegial form of governance. So here, what do you see? What you see is that academics play a crucial role in the decision-making processes of the university. They have a shared vision of the institution. Uh, there is also professional autonomy, and one might also argue that if you look at an institution, for example, let me just pick up, for example, any university, because I have Tejpur University written over there. Let me just talk about Tejpur University. That you have the faculty members who have been there or will be there for decades together. Vice chancellors come and go. Okay, that is true of any university, and sometimes vice chancellors come for a term. I mean, I was also there for a term. They're looking for a better appointment somewhere else, or they're trying to get to a better, more sort of prestigious position, whatever it might be. They're not all committed to that institution. Some are extremely, some may not be. And whereas academics have carried the ethos of an institution, carry the culture of an institution, and if you develop that culture to the academics, it is much more likely to be long-lasting than even if you had a very progressive vice chancellor for a short period of time. It also promotes a democratic setup where everybody plays a role, which is always good because you hear diverse viewpoints. You get an opportunity to discuss the ups and downs of decision making, ups and downs of a particular item or a particular decision that is to be made. And also the faculty or the community through the faculty or the academic council, which is a much broader body, have greater awareness of the way institutions function. I must state at this point that Tejpur University is a central university. The academic council is much more widely prevalent in universities across the country. But you'll find that when you look at state universities or even private universities, sometimes the academic council is full of representatives of the sponsors or the government. The representation of the academic community is often very small or minimal. Again, while looking at the governing structures, you'll find that the IITs have a two-tier structure where there is a Senate, which consists of the academic body, academic staff, academic professors and above, professors, okay? And you have a governing council, which usually goes by that unless there are matters of dispute which they need to look at and looks at broad policy decisions, but not the nitty-gritty of things. That actually the Senate effectively puts a rubber stamp to it. Universities often have a three-tier structure as well. They have an academic council. On top of that, they have an executive council, both of which are usually chaired by the vice chancellor. And then you have what is called a court, often called a court, and it has its origins in the UK, I think in Scotland, and that is chaired by the chancellor. Here again, broad policy decisions are looked at, and not the details. So the other aspect which I have not mentioned over here, that when for example, the academic council meets, when you have professors meeting to take decisions pertaining to a university, then you also realize that it provides an opportunity for them to meet across departments. And that is not something which usually happens in a university. You can see that, although Delhi University, for example, have a coffee house right inside the campus, but very often you'll find that the gossip or the chat or the discussions are within members of the same department. And they're all clustered in their own departments rather than, interacting across departments. This broad council of academic, this broader body of the Senate or the academic council consisting of professors, from the social sciences to the sciences, biological sciences, life sciences, humanities, arts, etc., provides also an opportunity for knowing each other across the university, which I think is another extremely valuable aspect, would not meet unless you has this kind of structure. Cotton University, where I was the vice chancellor, did not have this kind of structure, and you would be surprised that you know. For example, the elections to the college teachers association or the university teachers association were very undemocratic. They were usually decided by a few people who proposed each other's names, and it was done. So I felt that that was very undemocratic, and without giving much space or room for debate, I just declared elections with about a week's notice. And elections were held. Initially, there were calls for boycott, but over 99% of the faculty participated. But what was extremely interesting to see was that many of the faculty members visited other departments almost for the first time, although they have been there in the institution for more than a decade or two. And the importance of this also arises when you look at the way research happens. For example, today the frontiers of research are not confined to just the disciplines themselves as we have traditionally known them, but also across the boundaries of disciplines. So it's important to also provide forums for persons to interact or faculty to interact across all kinds of departments. And that is something which has also been, which also happens when you have a collegial form of governance with a senate or an academic council or a faculty. NCR, TIFR, and IUCA are relatively small, but universities are many times bigger. IITs are also many times bigger. But the culture in NCR, TIFR, and IUCA are very similar, although they are much smaller institutions where the faculty plays an extremely important role in the decision-making processes. Now, what are the criticisms? Why are we getting away from a collegium or collegial form of governance when I've said that there are so many good things to learn about it? And the criticisms have been they're inward looking. They tend to promote the status quo rather than being innovative. The large bodies and decision making takes a long time. Committees are set up which look into things in detail, and sometimes excludes junior members, which often tend to be women today, because if you look at a hierarchy of appointments or the faculty profile, I mean, today in the IITs, there are several women who are at deans, but I'm not sure there's any director who's a woman at this stage. So it tends to exclude junior members, although larger and larger number of women are actually becoming professors and becoming part of the Senate, which is increasing. But my own experience has been that sitting in large bodies in the Senate, whether it be at IIT or Tejpur University, that I did not find it, to be honest, that it takes time. Often I find that it is a vice chancellor's absence from an institution or being too busy with something else delays decision-making processes much more than a large body of persons meeting over a longish period of time. It is true that if the collegial community is split on ideological lines or just want to promote their own sort of agenda rather than look at the good of the institution as a whole, there can be endless debates or arguments. But my experiences in at least two or three major institutions where there's been a large number of people involved have been actually quite good, and I think it has worked well. In terms of the argument of against junior members, as I said, NCRA and TIFR, every faculty member, junior or senior, is part of the faculty and takes part in faculty meetings. But in larger bodies, I think with thousands of faculty members or many hundreds of faculty members, it may become untenable. The objective, I think, should be to actually make sure that more women or disadvantaged people also get opportunities to rise in their academic careers and be part of these bodies. But at least if you have representatives of a large number of representatives representing the community, information will flow, and at least there will be a much wider range of inputs available for decision making in a democratic process than trying to concentrate it on a few or one or two hands. So institutional culture and traditions, as I keep saying, as I want to stress again and again, plays a very important role. because these are very fragile structures. These are fragile structures, just like democracy, for example. You need to culture it, you need to protect it, you need to nurture it, and make it work. Nothing is ever perfect, but you try and go along a direction which is the best. Just one or two quotes on one quote on, but this is by Lord Noel Annan, who was provost of University College London. UCL, as you know, is one of the leading universities globally and always ranks pretty high in the global rankings. Lord Annan said, "Is there a university in the country where the governing body is not a dignified rubber stamp? The true governing body is the Senate. We should not want to return to the days when council really governed. We prefer self-government by the academic staff." This was quoted in a book by Shattuck, a leading educationist. But changes were beginning to take place. These particularly in the UK, for example, it took place quite dramatically, which was by two factors. I've just taken up one example over here just to illustrate to you how changes can take place. One was, of course, that Margaret Thatcher cut when she became the prime minister. She cut funds, and some universities coped well, who had a lot of access to research grants and all that. But many universities found it difficult to cope with the research cut. But more significant than that was that a lot of the polytechnics, were converted to universities. Polytechnics were converted to universities, and these polytechnics were more used to a very centralized kind of structures. They were not really the frontiers of research. They were also somewhat unionized, and they were more used to or familiar with the centralized form of governance or bureaucratic form of governance. Also, okay, and that also happened in Australia to a certain extent, when institutions, higher education institutions, merger of these were taking place with the universities. Okay, leading research universities I've written over here, like Oxford and Cambridge, maintained its governing structures, but many slowly drifted to a centralized governing structure. In India, actually, what we find today is that it is more and more centralized, and vice chancellors are exerting less of their independence. There is less of collegiality, even when a Senate is in place, and that is, to my mind, is not a very healthy process that is taking place presently in the country. Now, can you do away with bureaucracy at all? Probably we cannot. When you look at experience with university administration, there are statutes, there are rules, there are bylaws. Universities are usually established by an act. This is either an act of parliament for central universities, an act of the state legislatures for the state universities. And the UGC also recognizes deemed to be universities. And also we have, as I said, a whole host of private universities. And if the present trend continues, they will probably soon be larger than the number of public universities. And this university administration is usually highly hierarchical, non-egalitarian, and the question I want to ask oneself is that, can we make, there has to be rules and regulations. One accepts that. If you look at our structure, not very long ago, you'll all be familiar with the way the Indians break the rules or you can only see the simplest of things, like queuing for a bus. In fact, some time ago, we were climbing up on the Neanderthal caves in Kerala. And it's a very steep climb of 300 steps. These are not normal steps. These are things which have been cut into the rocks. If you slip, you could fall very badly and take many people down with you. But there was no dearth of people who were trying to, just push their way through. It was frightening. But the tendency to break the law, whether it be traffic laws or whether it be in the university sector or whether it be just queuing for the bus, it's just too widespread. I just don't know why that is ingrained in our community. When I was in Australia, just to give you an example, everywhere people would, queue up. When you just come to the Indian part of the city, it's gone. There's just no queues. People just rush towards the bus. Somehow, so I mean, I'm just trying to say that probably we require rules and for smooth governance, but can we combine them with an egalitarian ambience? Can universities function with a degree of bureaucracy and collegial forms of governance? And as we see that, as the IITs have shown us, or TIFR has shown us, or Ayuka functions that way, that it is possible. It's possible to take the community along, have rules which you follow, and have a smooth functioning of the institution through these laws, and also get the community involved in the governance structure, in governing the institution, in taking policy decisions, in being part of policy making, where you have an opportunity to give your inputs. Okay, and that I think is a good sort of mix between the two, and where the faculty also feels very involved in what is being done. The other form of governance, which is now increasingly being talked about, is managerialism, or what is called a new public management. It is an extremely centralized leadership. Managerialism evolved out of a fundamental shift from administrators as those providing a service to academia in the pursuit of teaching and research, to management as a means of control. Okay, this is I've taken from an article by Dean et al. From Julie Rowland's book, which is a very interesting book to read. A lot of things which I've taken because it's a very relatively recent book, and it looks at English-speaking countries, Anglophone countries, which I'm more familiar with than countries which are, which speak other languages which I'm not familiar with. And the arguments which have been given is that it needs to make rapid decisions in a market-driven environment, deemed to be more competent than academics to make these decisions. I personally have my own doubts about this, because I think long-term planning of an institution is done better, in my view, with a group of academics. And we also, know there are no dearth of examples of the business model going wrong in huge industries, in big major industries, whether it be in India or whether it be elsewhere, even in, economically, some of the most advanced countries like US have absolute economic disasters through bad management, which is sort of narrowed down to a few people, or a very small coterie. So, but what is happening is that we are actually, the ground reality is that this is being touted more and more. And for example, to look at this example of managerialism to management as a means of control. I mean, recently when we were organizing a workshop, there was a faculty member from one of the universities, I'll not get into details over here, who made a very nice case. It was a short workshop. I think it was about a week or something, less than that, about a week, say. Made a very nice case for attending the workshop to the university vice-chancellor, saying how it would benefit him, how it would benefit the department, and how all his responsibilities, teaching, etc., have been taken care of by colleagues or colleague of his, and seeking permission to go and attend. Firstly, I do not understand why a leave for 5 days is so centralized in a university, if it is not just for control. And a vice-chancellor should devote his or her time to far more important things to make the university grow than worry about absence of 5 days from a faculty member who wants to attend a workshop. It could easily be delegated to the head of the department, or the dean, or whatever. I think 5 days the head of the department should be adequate, in my view. But the reply which he got, which the poor fellow scanned and sent it, was just 2 words with the signature of the vice-chancellor, which is not allowed. And what kind of a culture do we create in our universities by such actions? What kinds of governance do we do? How do we inspire people? How do we motivate people? People will carry on doing their job, because if they don't teach or something, they will get a show cause notice and all the disciplinary action will be taken. But how do institutions grow when you can enthuse people? When you can enthuse people to do much beyond what they are required to do according to their salary or terms of appointment. And that culture is missing. That culture will miss if you just look at it from a financial point of view to raise resources, control academia, exercise power, vote your political master. And that is what is a trend which I think one has to avoid to build up institutions of excellence. What are the factors which have contributed to this? This is not unique to India. This is unique. This is going on in other parts of the country as well. As I said, in the UK, it was more of a culture which went up, but it's also been promoted by reduced public funding, so that these heads of institutions are busy raising resources which they think the faculty cannot do. There is more and more increased regulation of higher education, accreditation-linked financial support, and quality assurance processes. The effects these are actually having on the ground in terms of the quality of education is something which I think needs to be carefully or very, very carefully looked at. There are very few people actually working on these aspects. Professor Farkan Kamar was earlier, in charge or president of I think it was called the president of the Association of Indian Universities. He periodically publishes some of his analysis in the Hindu, but I see very little of critical analysis of what it is doing to actually the quality of higher education. Today, of course, we have some more regulations of how they're going to accreditate institutions. But again, I will come to later that, database policy is something which is lacking of what we're trying to do. We just go around trying to find knee-jerk solutions without looking at the broader picture. Okay, now what are the criticisms? I've already probably said a lot of criticisms, but separating executive decisions from academics. This can affect a sense of belonging. I gave you one example. There are many examples I could give you. In fact, Professor Narlikar once, when I was talking to him, told me of a university. Very correctly, he didn't tell me the name, and so I can't. I wouldn't have anyway shared it with you. But he was invited to give a very prestigious lecture, and what happened was that the vice chancellor invited him for a cup of tea before going to the lecture. The lecture was supposed to say start at 11 o'clock. And then he brought in tea. And then when it was close to 11, Narlikar is a person who is extremely punctual with time. I try to emulate him, but don't succeed very frequently. I mean, if he gives time to a student, he will be there 10 minutes before the scheduled time, and you'd get an opportunity to talk to him. I've seen this from 1977, 78, when I first joined TIFR, and he would reply to every mail that went to him, even from a student whom he hardly knew, like me in those days. So he was invited for tea, and then it passed 11 o'clock. It was 11 o'clock, and he said, well, our lecture is about to start. We should rush. He says, no, you sit. You finish your cup of tea, and he got some more biscuits. And then after about 11:25 or so, or 11:30, he said, now we can go. So Professor Narlikar asked him, why the delay? He said, well, if you don't keep them waiting, they will not realize how important you are. So that is the sad status. I mean, this is not an isolated example of the kinds of people who are governing our institutions. So new public management or decision-making at the top without taking the academic community or a section of it on board can affect implementation on the ground. After all, you want a faculty to be enthusiastic to carry out. Routinely, something will go off. And these are the aspects, I think, which are also affecting why our institutions are not rising to the top. It is true that these systems are also, being more widely prevalent in the West, in UK and Australia, I mentioned, but some of these institutions still stand some of the ground, and they've had a very rich tradition of research for decades and decades together. And managerialism takes attention away from teaching and research as a core purpose of universities and puts the emphasis on money and positional goods. Okay. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not that this is the magical solution. Each one of you can recount governance failures in the private sector as well. Major industries or major banks have actually gone bankrupt, as you know, and this is from the public management of centralized power systems that existed. So the other aspect which I wanted to stress, which I listed earlier, was an entrepreneurial university. Clark, in his 1998 book, Creating Entrepreneurial Universities, saying a strengthened steering core, an enhanced developmental periphery, a diversified funding base, a stimulated academic heartland, and an entrepreneurial culture. Okay. But he's not talking about this from the top. He's talking about developing these cultures from the bottom up. For change to take hold, one department of another needs itself to become an entrepreneur unit, reaching more strongly to the outside with new programs and relationships to generate more income. Their members need to participate in central steering groups. So this is also a bottom up. It's not something which is centralized administration. But as I said, you need rules and structures. Okay. This is grassroots participation, not via corporate bureaucracy. The other aspect, which is sort of important in all aspects, is networking, network governance, where you network with both within and outside the institutions. And if you were to draw a diagram, which I took from Julie Rowland's book, that how large you want to make these is up to you. But you need some amount of bureaucracy and managerial culture to execute the process. After all, when a vice chancellor is appointed, there is a certain executive responsibility which is put on him or her. But the university structures, the act themselves, should promote a collegial form of governance. And entrepreneurship and networking, I think, are essential elements essential elements in our education institutions. In fact, the last talk which you will hear in this series of lectures is by Mekin Maheshwari, who with his own money founded this foundation called Udyam Foundation in Bangalore. And today he's developing entrepreneurial skills in schools across 10 states in the country. But to my mind, promoting the collegial kind of governance is, I think, important for education institutions, although you need the responsibility resides with the appointed persons. In some ways, I often think that educational institutions like NEPA, the National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration, or even a group of objective, well-meaning academics who have experience of administration, should probably draw up an ideal act, to promote the kind of cultures in an institution which will actually create centers of excellence. But as Ambedkar said of our constitution, it's a good constitution, but it depends on how people take it along. You can trample upon the constitution, you can nurture it, worship it, and take it forward. And we have seen all kinds. And similarly, with the kind of acts we place in place, it depends on the culture that you develop. But at least a framework is there on which to develop. Today, when you look at and study the acts of many institutions, that you find that these kinds of thoughts are completely missing. In fact, they're often written by a lower level bureaucrat in an institution, and they're full of careless mistakes, which often creates tremendous problem because you can't touch the act. In fact, a recent university which I was reviewing, the kind of errors that were there were actually hilarious. There's one statement that the person's appointment to the term will end from the date of something it should have written. It was written from the death of something. So that's the kind of carelessness which acts are formed. But I think these basic cultures, to promote them, are important, in my view, if you are to have tomorrow's institutions of excellence. What are the institutional values, cultures, and traditions that I talk about, that I keep mentioning again and again? Transparency, accountability. These are the fundamentals of any good governance or administration at whatever level you want to talk about. Okay. Today people are going to court for secrecy to the highest court. But good governance always requires transparency. So one has to keep away from things which are not accountable and question them. Involvement of academics in decision-making processes, involvement of all stakeholders, and a fundamental commitment to social justice, equity and equality, and an egalitarian ambience. And policies at whatever level needs to be framed on data-driven work. Okay, data-driven work, because if we form policies without actually thinking far ahead with knee-jerk solutions, then what happens is that they don't work very well on the ground. We have seen that again and again, and you have your own examples. With the shortage of time, I will not delve too much into the details of that. Okay. When I talk about equity and equality, equity is a process by which we promote equality. That means we give a greater help to those who are disadvantaged. Our nation consists of large sections of the population who have been disadvantaged for generations. Whether it be a Hindu caste system or other forms of discrimination, whether it be gender discrimination, that there have been discrimination, and the Constitution itself made provisions for trying to address that. It is only when everybody sort of has an opportunity to improve that there is greater chance of society as a whole improving and also making much greater progress than we have been able to do so far. These are the values. I mean, let me now go a little bit onto my experience at Cotton. These are the practices which we try to follow as meticulously as possible. And while during my tenure at Cotton University, and just to give you one example, the cultures which I mentioned were egalitarian, compassion, empathy, social justice, and complete non-discrimination. As an institution too, when you want to make appointments, you have to make the best appointments in the interest of the institution. But towards that, then nothing should come in the way. Not ideological pressure from any political quarter, not ethnicity, not language, not religion. This is what I've shown you over here is a group photograph of the office staff who started off this new university. Cotton University was started off on the foundations of a historic college. Initially, the college was a constituent college of the university. Later, the two were amalgamated to form one university. I've seen that through in 1st of June 2017, in a glittering function when the current chief minister of the state, Himanta Biswa Sharma, came and inaugurated it and handed me over the new act which amalgamated two institutions. But what you can see over here is what is an example of where we try to promote egalitarianism in every form. I was a vice chancellor over here, and you can see me standing over here. I made it a point to see everybody outside when they came to visit me in the door, and encourage everybody to engage in discussion and debate. Did it come in the way of the administration? In my view, absolutely not at all. Okay. In fact, they brought out aspects sometimes which I had overlooked and had very interesting discussions as well. And they were all part of the process. I mean, if required, in fact, some of them worked till 11, 12 at night just to get things done without even me asking for it. That was a culture which was generated. So when we commit ourselves to social development for all, and that is a fundamental culture of our constitution as well. These are the words of the World Council for Social Development, March 1995, Copenhagen, defines inclusive society as a society for all in which every individual, each with rights and responsibilities, has an active role to play. Such an inclusive society must be based on respect for all human rights and fundamental freedoms, cultural and religious diversity, social justice, and the special needs of the vulnerable and disadvantaged groups. Democratic participation and the rule of law is to be promoted by policies that seek to reduce inequality and create flexible and tolerant societies that embrace all people. I mean, if you look at your own family, I mean, if somebody is more disadvantaged, if somebody is ill, if somebody is disabled, we all spend more time on the person. Why is it so difficult to think that we can stretch that to a wider community, whether it be in your state or the nation or the universe at large? It was an Indian lady, Hamsa Mehta, who played a fundamental role in framing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to make sure that women were included. And she has been credited with that many years later, working under the chairpersonship of Eleanor Roosevelt, I think, at that point of time. Let me now try and ask you a question, okay? So those who are familiar, don't answer it, but I want you to just put in the chat about how many of you actually recognize these words. Justice, social, economic, and political. Don't utter it, but just put it in the chat. Liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship. Equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual. How many of you recognize these words? From where has it been taken? Okay, excellent, Dr. Varrock. You actually came out very rapidly. That was very good. Okay. Anybody else was familiar with it? Just be honest and tell me how many of you. Preamble, very good. Dr. Saraswati Roy. Dr. Shalini Agarwal. Very good. Pranati Rad, Anil Chinchwade. Okay, excellent. Okay, so at least maybe I'll say a dozen of you were familiar straight away from where the words came from, which is excellent. And why I pointed this out, why I wanted to stress this aspect of it, is that this is something which has to come into the ethos of our institutions. Before discussing that, let me just tell you briefly about the preamble itself. Okay, this is the entire preamble. I'm not going to read it, and this is something which all of you would be familiar with. You can look it up if you're not very familiar, but at least the fact that nearly a dozen of you could answer it straight away is good. But I would have liked it to be 100%, because this is our precious Constitution, and what it has done is actually put an end to discrimination, put an end to inequalities, and promoting sort of brotherhood and sisterhood of all citizens of the country at one stroke, when the Constitution was adopted on the 26th day of November 1959. It came into operation on 26th of January, which is celebrated as a Republic Day, but this was accepted by the Constituent Assembly on the 26th day of November 1949. And one of the key sentences, I mean, each word is precious, each word is great, but just to recollect, when we are talking about higher education, equality is important. All the words are important, but I just wanted to focus a little bit on fraternity, which usually gets less attention than it deserves. Fraternity is basically a brotherhood or sisterhood of all individuals. And it was, if I remember correctly, 6th of February 1948, when Babasaheb Ambedkar pulled out a sheet of paper from his pocket, which had the word fraternity first into the draft of the preamble of our Constitution. Not only did the members who were drafting the preamble or close to it appreciated it, but it was appreciated by the Constituent Assembly as well. And there followed debates whether fraternity should come first or the unity of the nation, unity and the integration of the nation should come first. And Babasaheb Ambedkar argued that if you do not assure the fraternity and of the individual, of individuals, and assuring the dignity of the individual, how can you guarantee the unity and integrity of the nation? So it is important to reflect on each word of this and how much of thought has gone into it in terms of framing this, how much of debate has gone into it. And the kind of divisions that we see today, we have to distance ourselves if we need our nation to really grow. Embrace all with kindness, embrace all with empathy and compassion. And that has to be the culture in our educational institutions, in the governance of our institutions, in the culture of our institutions. Just reject divisions in all ways that one can think about. A little bit on Babasaheb Ambedkar, some of you may have read a lot of it, some of you may have less. I have not, mine would be mediocre, but whatever you are, independent of how much time you have, it is worth just going through this little booklet called Waiting for a Visa, which is an autobiographical piece published in 1935. It is freely available in the web. It's just, a few pages, not too long, and talks about his life, his early life, particularly starts of it. And only when he was 7 years old, he he took a train to see his father, which was working elsewhere, and he had to get down in the train station and take a tonga. Her father unfortunately didn't get a message and didn't send anybody to receive him. And because he belonged to the lower Mahar caste, no Tongawala would actually take him. The the station master also withdrew when he realized it, but later negotiated for a Tongawala to take him. But the Tongawala would not initially ride with him. He would go along and they would sit. He didn't get water at the night when they had to stop. But these were the experiences of a 7-year-old. When he went to Elphinstone College, a casteist teacher said Mahar should not seek higher education. And within about 50 years, supported by the Maharaja of Baroda, I think at that point in time, he was one of the most educated of Indians, most progressive thinkers of Indians, with degrees from Columbia University and London School of Economics, profoundly influenced by the philosopher John Dewey. Okay, he went back to Baroda to work because he was supported from there. He didn't find a place to live. He pretended to be a Parsi, got recognized, nearly got beaten up, rushed back to Bombay. I mean, a life of discrimination. And yet he grew up to be the person that he is, fighting the rights of the most marginalized, giving to us the leadership and the architect of our constitution. So let us see how far we have got in our institutions because when you come to governance, you have to be aware of what is the ground realities of our institutions. When we keep arguing and claiming about, discussing about affirmative actions and reservation policies, these are the nationwide figures of students, okay? Undergrad STEM, PhD student, assistant professor, associate professor, this is a nationwide level, okay? And for the Adivasis, STs and SCs, the Dalits, the marks are given where the government reservation policies stand. And you can see that except for the OBCs, other backward communities, they're all way behind. And the higher up you go, the further behind it is. And this is only for the students that have exceeded it, okay? These are aspects which, when I say policy should be data-driven, thought should be data-driven, it should be rational thinking based on facts. This is a piece of, it's a paper which is published in Nature, one of the most prestigious journal, by Ankur Paliwal, a journalist based in Delhi. And they have carried out a series of articles, Nature. I mean, over here it is more caste, whereas in the UK or the US, it will be more of color, race. So these are aspects which they have looked into the kind of, this is just for nationwide figures. If you look at PhD students in India, these are the reservation marks, mid-ranked IITs. You can see that, SCs and STs, they're all way behind. BHU, you find that, the OBCs are ahead, and OBCs have actually been able to make maximal use of the reservation policies, because often you need, in the philosopher or sociologist Bourdieu's terms, the social capital to also move on, the cultural capital to move on. And that is often lacking, and that is where they need a far more intensive helping hand than what we have seen before. If you look at faculty members only, if you look at top-ranked IITs, if you go to at the assistant professor level, a few are going in, but you can see the percentage. Every reserve category put together, it should have been 49%, but you can see it is barely about less than 10%, putting everything together. So that is the current situation. My natal institute, Tata Institute, I don't think had any professor, and I'm not sure if it has any even today from the underprivileged categories. So that is the kind of situation we face today. And why it is important for governance is that when you look at the kinds of teachers we have, the situation is reverse. Okay, look at and to respect that also requires a commitment to equity, which underlines respect for diversity. I've already mentioned about the GER being about 27.3% now, and OBC students actually increased from 27 to 37% of the student population. General category, the actual numbers have increased for all, but all I'm saying is a percentage. So if you look at the percentage today, the underprivileged category is actually slightly larger than the general category. But within each group, the numbers have gone up. Today we have 41.3 million students. This is 2020-21, the All India survey of survey of higher education. But what we find, as we just saw, is that a majority of teachers are from the privileged group. Paliwal's actually article talked about instances where privileged class teachers refuse to guide students from underprivileged or lower caste backgrounds. Is it an isolated incident? Is it widespread? I have no idea. Okay, but there was at least one incident which he recounted in his article. So to develop the qualities of compassion and empathy, which you can be proud of just to be human, is something which requires leadership, which requires governance structures, which requires careful study, data-based research, both qualitative and quantitative. You will not get straightforward answers to these questions. And that is why qualitative research in social sciences become important, because these numbers you may not, these instances you may not get by just trying to fill up questionnaires or surveys or tick numbers. These are carefully integrating with the community or communicating with your subjects you're studying and finding out how widely prevalent they are. But these are aspects which needs actually to pay attention to take our institutions forward, to be institutions which embrace all. Today you can see that even in Dalit students or tribal students who make it to the IITs, look at the number of suicides which are taking place. They have struggled through a lot in life to get there. Parents struggling to put their children in quota. I mean, look at the number. I mean, just the other day, there was another sad suicide in quota. So the thing is that, developing these qualities which enable everybody to actually progress to whatever level they can, having that culture, having those bridge courses in place properly. No IIT has it today. They take in reserve category students, but meaningful bridge courses are hardly there in the institution. They do it for Namko Vaste kind of thing, but not with the passion and compassion which it requires to build societies which are equitable and equal, where each individual as a human being can flourish and grow. To understand many of these aspects, you need research. And governance and management and policy making at whatever level, whether it be the NEP, whether it be a policy in the department, whether it be policy in the institution or university, requires, in my view, to be based on an understanding of the data, that what the data is telling you, or even today with the kind of techniques which we have, and the mathematical techniques and tools, particularly with artificial intelligence and machine learning, you could even actually probably work out possible scenarios of your decision and policy making decisions. So these are, I've not heard of it being done at whatever level it may be. And institutional research is research conducted within an institution of higher education to get information which supports institutional planning, policy formation, and decision making. This is by a well-known institutional researcher called Sope, based in the US, as far as I'm aware. And this is just, and to me it is even limited actually, because it should even policy making bodies, whether it be at the state or central level, whether it be NEP, it really requires research. I mean, why is a 4-year system better than a 3-year system? I haven't seen an argument anywhere. I haven't seen a scholarly paper anywhere, but we are doing it. Hopefully students will do okay. And institutional research encompasses a wide range of activities which could be useful for faculty members, administrators, and students in understanding one's own data, identifying areas of weakness, and taking corrective actions, and making institutions accountable to themselves. So research and database, being objective, are important aspects to each one of us as an academic. So institutional research could include critical examination of curriculums along with the learning objectives, assessment of pedagogic processes and the relation to student outcomes, awareness and development of program content knowledge among faculty members, enhanced student outcomes, incorporation of technology and resources available in the web to aid teaching and learning, evaluation of workloads of students and faculty, relation of student outcomes to socioeconomic backgrounds and the social and cultural capital they may come with. This is vitally important to see where you need to target, extra courses without being actually discriminatory in some sense, in every sense. Today, actually, universities which I've been reviewing or doing an academic and administrative audit of the university, I get horrified when they present to me that they've categorized each student into what are called slow learners and advanced learners. And I asked them, why do you do that? I mean, what is the psychological effect of a student on classifying that, hey, you're a slow learner, I got to do this for you? And these are lists which are available. I mean, isn't it terrifying to be categorized as such? If you look at some of the greatest minds who didn't do well, includes names like Albert Einstein. And why do you do that? And the answer is very simple. NAC requires us to do it. So I think these are things which require research. What is the effect of this on student outcomes? What is the effect of categorization on student outcomes? You can do these things far more subtly. You can help somebody who's not doing well. I mean, in Canada, the school level, for example, what I've seen is that, parents would volunteer and come to the school and sit with children who require help. They would, without making much fuss about it, call in a counselor to talk to groups of students. And it would be done so casually as though nothing is going on. So these are aspects which our institutions need to learn. Diversity among the student and faculty members and statutory governing bodies. There's a lot talked about diversity among students, but very little about diversity among faculty members. You can see the gory statistics that I've shown you today, and nothing at all is talked about statutory governing bodies at all. What happens in statutory governing bodies is that if there is not a wide diversity, it's very easy for people to fall into coteries, execute their game plan or their objectives. Diversity actually acts as a check to these kinds of activities as well, enriches the discussions because they come with different kinds of knowledge, different kinds of backgrounds, different kinds of cultures, different ways of thinking, different ways of doing things. Extracurricular activities and activities in an institution, their effects on the students, research process and outcomes. I mean, today you suddenly have an API system, you count up points and you find people proliferating in some predatory journals. India leads in the publication in predatory journals. China doesn't come too far. That is the kind of situation which you just execute something which you think will yield a result. It doesn't, because it doesn't based on a ground study of what it is likely to lead to, either by simple surveys by sociologists, qualitative or quantitative or combination of both, or even simulating from experiences or carried out on a small scale, see how it works out, and then translate to a larger scale. Have a plan. Creation of opportunities for leadership positions for women and minority groups among students, staff, and faculty. Placements of alumni, as these can provide an important feedback to redesign curriculum to be more flexible and liberal, and also assess how different departments are functioning, seat strengths and allocation of resources in the respective departments. So these are, just some of the aspects which institutional research can look after, can attend. These are not limited to, but these are examples of what can and should be done. I will highlight on the last aspect of how different departments are functioning. A recent article, not very long ago, published in Current Science by the Center for Policy Research at the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. They looked at a very simple thing, which is that it's a premier, it's one of the leading IITs, right? It's one of the oldest and it's one of the leading IITs. It ranks very high. And you look at what the alumni who are passing out from these departments, from the various departments, what are they doing? I mean, are they doing something which they learned and using their knowledge in the jobs they're getting? After all, the IITs take up a lot of resources. The alumni also contribute hugely to it. The cost per student is large, and parents have invested a huge amount in either getting them to quota or some other kinds of tuitions and getting them admitted. And fees are also rising in the IITs with decreased government support or public support. So what are they doing? Then you find that except for 2 or 3 departments, computer science, I think it was electrical and electronics engineering, there were just 2 or 3 departments where more than 50% of the students were doing jobs which are related to their study. The others were all below 50%. I think if I remember correctly, the worst was aeronautics. 87% of the students from aeronautics do jobs which have nothing to do with aeronautics. So you'd never know that unless somebody actually did the work. And now, based on that work, you try and see how best to address it. Should you merge departments? Should you have aeronautics in only one IIT rather than, or only in one centralized place if there is so little absorption of them? So these are decisions which institutional research can provide to you, and which is sort of sadly, not in place. Globally, actually, there's a lot of international research taking place, right from the US, where it originated. There's a European body, there's an Australian body, there's a UK body, there's a Canadian body, there's a Nigerian body, there's an African body. But in India, it is still at its infancy. There is this IQA's, internal quality assurance cell. They collect data for the accreditation agencies, or to see who should be promoted, does it get required points. But that is more of accountancy. It is not research. So you need to ask the proper research questions based on the data. Those data are hardly being used. Even NAC data or NIRF data, there's a little being done by Professor Kumar, as I mentioned earlier, but there is very little which is being done with even the data which is being collected. Now, to have an institutional research unit, you require a range of skills. This was an article by Patrick Terenzini, which I taken a summary from an article by Eimers in a handbook of institutional research. You need technical and analytical knowledge. You need factual knowledge. You need methodology skills. You need to understand computing and computing software. He also classifies issues intelligence, understanding key issues in higher education, especially the internal issues most germane to your institution, how your institution functions, including the formal and informal decision-making processes, ability to work with and through others to accomplish goals, and contextual intelligence. These are the three aspects which he highlighted in a very seminal paper, which is widely quoted in the literature on institutional research. Understanding the culture of higher education, including your own institutions and its history, such as institutional memory. We also have so little culture of maintaining institutional memory or institutional history, isn't it? It's so easily undone by a new vice chancellor, new institution who tries to undo everything that the previous one has done. I don't know whether it's a sense of insecurity or what, How business is done at your institution, who are the key players and processes of your institution, respective to perspectives of all constitutions, knowledge of the environment in which the college operates, because we are all embedded in society. You might think that there is a huge team required, but when you actually find, and in fact, a lot of expertise is required, it's really a team effort. And some universities in the US have, 10 to 12 members working on these aspects in the institution, but the general number is very low. The average is about 3, I think, if I remember correctly. And because of lack of budget, lack of resources, etc., they allocate some resources for it, but not enough to do the entire spectrum of things. So alternative models which could explore that is that you have a core team which you can support, but you try and use the expertise across the institution. So that is also being discussed in the literature in order to promote institutional research across universities, across a university, or across even groups of universities. Okay. And knowledge of the environment is important because we are all embedded in a society, and we have to take cognizance of that in designing our policies. So I will briefly talk about, and then I will leave it to questions. None of you have interrupted in between, which is a sad thing. An experiment just tell you a little bit about experiment at Cotton University, just trying to start off institutional research at the university while I was there. And as an experiment, we formed a small team of a sociologist, of a computer scientist, and 2 physicists, both happened to be astronomers. And we looked at a particular year of admissions into the master's program. We looked at the performance. We looked at admissions, where they come from, how they come from, the performance in the examinations. And when I say mobility and origins of students, I mean, how did they get there? We also asked the questions, where do science students come from? And we also looked at faculty recruitment to just see that whether whether data show that we are being diverse as well. being a state university located in Guwahati, it is natural that a lot of the appointments will be from the state speaking the local language. But is there adequate number from outside as well? So what we found in the admissions is that, students come from all over the state, but their mobility is quite interesting to look at, because what happens in a public university where fees are extremely low, particularly at the postgraduate level. Cotton University or Cotton College at that time also had a higher secondary where the elite of Guwahati would like them to study and, get the best facilities, and they will move on to other cities, other even continents probably. But the ones who come to postgraduate admissions over there are largely from the middle income or the lower middle income group of the family, of the community. So you need to actually make sure that they're educated well, because the bulk of them will all in all likelihood stay in the state. They're children of, marginal business persons, small farmers, small government jobs. The bulk of them, some of them would be more senior, but I'm talking about the average over here. So they have to pay very little fees. And even among them, some of them actually struggle to pay the small minimal amounts they were there. There are a lot of heartrending stories, which I will not spend time on today because I'm approaching 6:15. Okay. And then what they do is that the parents, for example, particularly girls, we found that they would say in a less developed district of the state, because development has also been patchy, that they will move from, say, Karbi Anglong to a neighboring district where education opportunities would be better and the costs would be affordable. And this would be, in that district, the higher socioeconomic strata of the society. Then they will go to, Nongam would be sort of close by. Then they may go to Jorhat, which is with a slightly higher development index, do their undergraduate studies there. And then in the postgraduate, if they continue to do well, they will try to come to Guwahati, which is the capital city. And in spite of its expenses, they will try to get a hostel seat or stay in PG accommodation and do their courses. So these are the people who could afford it. And many of the students, if you look at the place of origin of the students compared to the place of undergraduate degree, you'll find that the place from the district of Kamrup, where the university was located, shoots up when you look at the students from the who have done their undergraduate degree here compared to those who have done their prior education closer to the hometown. And these are important aspects to look at, because when the NEP talks about closing down institutions beyond a certain number, that you're going to cut off access to students, and that too among the most marginalized of sections of our society. So that is why I keep saying that policies have to be driven by data, the ground realities of what is happening, rather than just looking at economics of situations or copying a model from China where things operate very differently. And then you also find that students from SC/ST backgrounds are not doing as well and are doing poorly compared to the students from our general categories. But we also looked at whether there may be discrimination in the examination thing. They generally do better during the semester evaluations, but not as well in the end semester evaluations. There are probably various reasons for that, but there seems to be absolutely no evidence of any discrimination. But when you plot the during the semester examination results with the end semester examination, there's usually not too unreasonable correlation, because a good student, you'd expect the person to do well during both evaluations. But when the classes became slightly large, then it was a complete scatter. It became more and more of a scatter, which meant that marks were not being standardized, or it was shared by too many people who had their own norms. So you can see that these things happening, reality on the ground. When a student gets the grade sheet, he or she doesn't know what's going on behind. So these are things where you need to take corrective steps, and you need to make sure that every student is being evaluated appropriately. And these will not come out unless you actually look at the data, unless you actually do research looking at the data. And this is not done in our institutions. Just as policies are not based on detailed data study, even the university operates without a detailed study of the internal processes that are going on. Another question we asked ourselves is, where do science students come from? And what we found was quite surprising, in the sense that the science students largely came from about half a dozen or a little more districts rather than from entire state, whereas students from the entire state applied for admissions or came for admissions. And when we looked deeper, we found that these also came from the districts with higher human development indices, greater facilities. So it also reflects a patchiness of quality science education across the state. What happens is that colleges today, I think, again, I keep forgetting the numbers, I'm getting old. I think about 78% of the colleges in the country today are in the private sector. So what do private sector colleges do? Not always, but very frequently. They want to run a college, they want to collect fees, they want to educate people. But a science college requires more investment. They have to set up labs, they have to get good science teachers, and that is often a little bit more of a challenge in drawing up an arts college. So you'll find that a lot more students are actually qualifying in the humanities and arts. Not that humanities and arts are not important, but science is actually playing down, particularly in weaker regions. And today, when we look at the stories of men and women from marginalized regions who have done extremely well, including our own Meghnad Saha, who actually framed one of the fundamental questions of astrophysics, immortalized for all time as Saha's ionization equation, came from a Shudra caste, discriminated against most of his life, and yet came up to be one of the finest scientists and extremely socially conscious from Bengal. So these are aspects also which are important to look at. And hopefully, as the years go by, quality science education will become more widespread. In fact, this was obvious when you look at the fraction of students who appear for a higher secondary examination, the class 12 examination. 80% of the students, 80 to 90% of the students, I think, at least 80, are from the arts background. And that itself should have rung alarm bells in the administration or the academia or the intelligentsia ages ago, but it has not. We're all happy in our cozy little places because the intelligentsia come from the more privileged sections of society, are usually resident in the districts which are better developed. So this has just gone on and on and on. Faculty recruitment, I think we have done reasonably well. And in all recruitments, I can say with pride, I don't think a penny was exchanged. Today, we have a situation where even vice chancellors are accused of corruption. And there was a reasonable degree of diversity. In spite of local resentment and opposition, we managed to recruit who qualified as per committees which were very broad-based with experts from both within and outside the state, from neighboring states, Manipur, Nagaland. There were also students from Warda. There was a Hindi teacher who came. Then there was teachers from West Bengal. So ethnicity plus religion also. There was reasonable spread, although the bulk were from spoke Assamese were from the state and spoke other languages. So these are aspects, I think, which all institutions or governance of institutions need to pay attention to in order to be able to understand their own institutions and how they are functioning. And of course, it needs to be done at a more higher level as well. As I mentioned earlier, studies of National Institution Ranking Framework and NAC data are hardly looked at. I've only seen articles by Farkan Kamar on the NIRF rankings, where he has pointed out actually huge differences between the top few and the latter ones. That the drop is pretty precipitous. So if you arbitrarily go about and saying that I will give special grants or special recognition to the first 50, you'll be treading in very dangerous territory. But what you need to do is nurture all institutions, develop institutions of culture, appoint the best persons at all levels, independent of ideological leanings, but based on academic merit and leadership qualities, and also qualities which may not be discernible, but particularly persons have a history of compassion, empathy for the communities at large. To my mind, these are the ideal persons to take up academic leadership and governance and management of our institutions of higher education. So it's nearly 1823, so I will stop at that. Thank you very much.